Hey guys, Will here. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Sim-Lab P1X Pro sim racing cockpit. Now, if you've been watching the channel for a while, you would know that I've been running the P1X as my daily driver sim rig for, believe it or not, the last 5 years now. So what they've tried to achieve with the P1X Pro is basically improving on that original design. So they've tried to reduce the cost, reduce the weight, make it easier to build, easier to work with in general, whilst maintaining all the things that we loved about the original P1X. So strength, rigidity, adaptability, and of course, adjustability. So have they been able to achieve all of those things? Well, that's what we're going to be finding out in today's video. So let's dive in. So just a couple of quick things to cover off before we dive into the review, guys. Firstly, big thank you to Sim-Lab for sending across the cockpit for us to check out. Now, normally in our review videos, we like to do as much cross comparison as we possibly can between different manufacturers. Now, in fairness, we're not going to do too much of that in today's video simply because the cockpits that are equivalent to this that we've tested in the past are older revisions. Most of those manufacturers do also have new revisions available of their cockpits. So it's not really fair to compare the latest version of the Sim-Lab cockpit against, say, the latest version of the track racer cockpit, which we haven't tested, for example. So hopefully we'll be able to get our hands on those to cross compare a little bit later on down the line. But I just wanted to make that very clear. If you are going back and watching some of our older review videos of some of the other competitor cockpits, just be aware that those are reviewing older versions than what's available right now. The exception to that is we have just recently done a written review of the new track racer TR160S flight sim cockpit. So you can check that out on our website. I'll link it down in the description below for you if you are interested in that. Very similar experience to that, I would imagine, to what you get with the sim racing version, but we haven't personally tested the sim racing version here. Now, if you do decide you want to pick up any of the Sim-Lab gear that you see in today's video or any other sim racing gear, we do have some discounts and affiliate links available for you down in the description below, or you can just hit up boostedmedia.net for all of that. That's a great way of saving yourself a little bit of money if you're buying any sim racing gear and helping us out in the process, which we obviously really appreciate as well. That's what keeps us running here. So thank you for your support there. But without further ado, let's dive in. We'll talk a little bit about pricing just basically as we go through today. We'll flash the prices up on the screen for you rather than getting bogged down in that because there is quite a bit to get through. So let's dive in now and take a look at exactly what we've got here. So obviously you know that the frame of this guy is the Sim-Lab P1X Pro. Let's start at the top here and just work our way through all the bits and pieces that we have on this setup. So starting with the screen, I know that's already caught your eye. So that is the 57-inch Odyssey Neo G9 from Samsung. We've had this in our possession for about 6 months now, testing it out. I've been using it for pretty much everything in my day-to-day life, from general gaming, editing videos, general desktop and accounting, all those boring things, all the way through to sim racing like what we have it set up for now. So these monitors are extremely expensive. They have a lot of benefits, but there's also a few important considerations with these guys as well. So we will have a review video dropping on this relatively soon. Definitely would recommend make sure you subscribe to the channel if you aren't already so you don't miss out on that, because there are definitely some things I think you need to consider if you're looking at picking one of these up, some limitations that you definitely want to be aware of. So that is the screen. We then move down to the wheel deck. Now, Sim-Lab do have a couple of different configurations available depending on the wheelbase that you intend to mount on this. We will be having a look at all three options in today's video a little bit later on, but this is the front mount option, and we have bolted to that the SimuCube 2 Pro. The wheel is a grid by Sim-Lab MPX wheel. Now, you might remember we did a review of this wheel a little while ago, and it was actually one of our favorite sim racing wheels, actually my favorite sim racing wheel of last year. This is a new revision that's come out that we're testing with just a couple of little tiny tweaks to the design. So I'll be sharing some more information on that relatively soon as well. We then move down to the shifter. This is a Husingveld mag shift, which we're just testing out for the first time on this rig. Very impressed with it so far, but we'll obviously be doing a full review of that a little bit later on. We have the XB1 handbrake from Sim-Lab as well. Again, we will be reviewing that relatively soon. And that is sitting on top of the optional Sim-Lab handbrake mount. So the mount you see here is something that you will have to pay extra for. It doesn't come included with the rig. This whole assembly here, this whole arm does come, but you have to order that part separately. We then have the Speed 1 seat, which I'm very impressed with so far. Very high build quality. One of the things I really love is that not only can you remove the cushion, but you can also actually unzip the cushion and wash it as well, which I think is very important for a colored cushion like that. It is a little bit narrow for me. I'm a little bit fat at the moment, but there are a couple of different sizes available for this, and I now have an incentive to lose some weight, so that's cool. But we'll be doubling back on this a little bit later on and talking about rigidity and all those important things when we get on through today's video. So just one more thing to be aware of as well, these rails that you see the seat mounted on, you do have to buy those separately as well. You of course do have the option of adding things like slidable seat rails if you want to as well. well, but we've tried to keep this as minimal as we possibly can to keep the cost down and basically get a baseline for how rigid this thing can be before you start adding in a bunch of accessories. We have the optional drink cup holder there as well. That seemed like the most sensible place to mount it, nice and easy in reach. Because of the way this profile is designed, and we'll discuss this a little bit later on, we were only able to use one bolt to mount that, but it's not really a problem. All it's doing is just holding a drink, so that's absolutely fine. I'll flash the diameter of this up on the screen for you as well, but it is quite a large cup, so yeah, you might find if you're running a motion rig or something like that, it's not really suitable. You might want to have something that has some little inserts to hold your cup in place, but otherwise it is absolutely fine. Then moving across to the front of the rig, we have the Sim-Lab XP1 load cell pedals. Now we reviewed these a couple of months ago on the channel, and those are sitting on top of a Sim-Lab pedal tray, which is an optional accessory. So by default, the cockpit does come with just two pieces of profile, a 40x80 and a 40x160, and then you can insert T-nuts to bolt pretty much whatever you want to the tray. But given that we were mounting these particular pedals, we did need to have a pedal tray, so we opted to go for their pedal tray so we could demonstrate that as well. Happy to say minimal, if any, meaningful flex in that at all. We'll obviously get into that a little bit later on. And then we also have the heel rest bolted on to that as well. And then just moving up from here, we also have the integrated monitor stand. So obviously that is holding the 57-inch screen that we saw just a little bit before. There is, of course, a freestanding option available too if you want to opt for that. But I wanted to test out the integrated because one of the things that has always troubled me about these integrated stands on a lot of other rigs that we've tested is they do have a tendency to wobble around. And even if you're doing things like rocking from side to side in your rig, you'll find the screen just starts shaking and it's not a real great experience. So I wanted to test out what this one was like. And as you'll see as we get on through today's video, very, very, very rigid, surprisingly so, even with the huge 57-inch Samsung monitor mounted on it. So that is the rig. Let's dive in now and talk about some of the details around the build process. Now, you've probably heard it said before that most aluminium profile rigs are pretty much the same as each other. And look, that certainly can be the case at any given price point. But I think manufacturers have kind of become aware of this and they're all kind of scrambling to find a point of difference to differentiate within the market. And that is certainly the case with the P1X Pro. So what I want to do now is take you through what this thing was actually like to put together and some of those points of difference that set it apart from anything that we've tested before here on the channel. So we'll start off down the bottom here, having a look at the profile. Now, if you've ever worked with an aluminium profile cockpit in the past, you've probably come across these corner brackets. These are usually used to bolt two pieces of aluminium profile together at a 90-degree angle like so. You'll notice on this particular rig, there is absolutely none of those. And that immediately makes the build process a lot more straightforward and simple than it has been in the past. The only corner brackets we find on the entire rig are just these guys here. That's literally just butting these two pieces together here. Everywhere else on the rig, you'll see you've got holes drilled through the profile itself and then a thread tapped on the opposing side that allows you to bolt the pieces directly together. But basically for each 90-degree joint, you've got one bolt instead of two and a bracket. So it just keeps things simple. That obviously keeps costs down as well. And it just makes for, in my opinion at least, a cleaner product overall. And you can see how sleek this thing looks. Now, while we're on the subject of bolting things together, one thing that I've always loved about Sim-Lab cockpits is that they do include rollerball style T-nuts for use on their profile. So if you aren't aware of what T-nuts are, these are basically little pieces that you can insert into the rails like this. So basically you've got these channels in the profile, and we'll talk about the missing channels here in just a moment in case you're wondering about that. But basically it's got this little rollerball on the back here, which is spring loaded. So you can see that's got a little bit of spring tension on it. And what happens is basically you can pop that into the channel. It goes in like so, then you spin it to the side and you can move it around to get whatever you want to bolt in the exact position that you want, and it will then stay in that position. So you can imagine if you're trying to mount something here, for example, the T-nut's not just going to slide to the bottom every time. Now, some other cockpit manufacturers don't include that style of T-nut. They include these spring leaf ones, and I'll come a little bit closer to the camera for you. And these work essentially in the same manner. They slot in, but these parts tend to get a little bit more snagged on the profile itself, particularly with painted cockpits like this one. We find that they can be quite difficult to slide up and down. You tend to have to loosen things off a lot more if you want to move them on the rig. And look, I mean, they do both get the job done, but I just much prefer working with these style. And then if you want to get it out as well, all you need to do is just kind of push the ball down. It's probably going to be embarrassing me now, but you can kind of get in with two pinkies, flip it to the side like that, and then pop it out. That was actually easier than I expected it to be. Now, there is quite a bit of cost cutting that we can see in these designs now compared to the original P1X, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But it's good to see that they haven't cut costs on the things that sort of impact the user experience directly, both in terms of the build process, in terms of adaptability and expandability, of course, and rigidity as well. So just wanted to run you through those T-nuts quickly. But let's talk a little bit more now about this profile. Now, one of the things that I'm not subjectively a huge fan of is the new painted coating that they're doing on these. These are powder coated now. The original P1X that we had was black anodized. And look, I just think the anodized finish is a little bit classier, but look, I mean, you might disagree with me there. The matte black does look quite nice, but if you come up a little bit closer here, you can see the front mount that they've actually sent us is anodized. So you can see it has that nice, smooth, almost brushed finish on it. And it's just a little bit more consistent compared to the matte finish that we have on the rest of the profile. We do find that this powder coating does tend to chip rather than scratch. So look, I'm not saying that it scratches more easily than anodizing does, because I mean, this scratches pretty easily as well. Like, honestly, our P1X is pretty scratched up now from all the things that we've been bolting on and taking off over the years. But if you come in here, you can see, for example, where we were adjusting the monitor, there's some pretty big chunks that have come out of the powder coating there, rather than, it's almost like it's just kind of flaked and chipped off, rather than just a tiny little scratch, which you would have in that location with anodizing. We did also find a couple of pieces of profile in the kit where they hadn't been dusted off properly. Obviously, when you cut the profile, it creates a lot of sawdust, basically, metal fragments everywhere. And in a few areas that had basically just been painted over, so as soon as you touch it, it just kind of flakes off and you end up with bare metal underneath the powder coating. So a little bit of quality control, I think, that needs to be improved there. We did obviously get in touch with them. They said that that's not the normal experience, and they have actually sent us some replacement profile. But look, I mean, them hand-picking replacement profile to send us doesn't really paint an accurate picture for you guys of what you can expect if you buy one of these things. So look, I think that the best solution there is to let you guys know that that's something that happened to us, and basically put the call out. They said that they've sold thousands of these things so far. So if you do own one of these cockpits, let us know in the comments down below the video whether you've had a similar experience there, or whether yours has been absolutely perfect. It was only 2 pieces out of the 20 or so pieces of profile that we have here. But yeah, I would say that it looked like whoever was painting it was rushing that day. Maybe it was a Friday afternoon and they wanted to get off to the pub or something like that. But yeah, otherwise it was pretty well presented. Personally, subjectively, I do prefer the old anodized finish over the matte black, but that is just my personal preference. Now, you might have heard me say when we reviewed the ASR4 cockpit from Advanced Sim Racing that I was actually a fan of the powder coating that they did there. Their powder coating was a little bit more sturdy, I would say, than what we have here. That was more like an automotive paint. Now, I'm not a paint expert by any means, but that was powder coated, and then it had a clear coat over the top as well. And one of the concerns I had with that was it was going to add a lot of thickness and therefore make it difficult for T-nuts to slot in and for things to line up correctly. Now, we didn't end up finding that that was really the case with the ASR4 cockpit, but look, I got to be honest and say that I did find that, at least in our experience, the painted finish on that was a little bit better than what we've experienced with this particular cockpit here. Now, while we're on the subject of profile as well, we want to talk about the missing channels here. Now, that is going to make it a little bit more tricky to mount things like motion systems, depending on the bracketry that comes with it. Of course, you can drill if you need to. You can create a little plate to go across between the 2 channels, but I want to explain the reason why there's the missing channels here, because a lot of people assume that it's purely just for aesthetic reasons. It looks a little bit cleaner. And look, I mean, subjectively, again, that is the case. But what they've actually done here is this profile is basically 2 pieces of 40 by 40. So each one of these, this is 40 series profile. So basically the width is 40 millimeter, and then every channel is a 40 millimeter section. So if you've got this is 160. This here is 120 because it's 3 channels wide. And then this here is 40 by 40. So what they've done with this profile, as you can see here, is they've actually hollowed out the middle section. So that reduces the weight and the material cost quite significantly. Now, you might be thinking, oh, that's not going to be rigid at all. But look, honestly, in our experience, this thing is absolutely rock solid. There's no flex in the cockpit that's noticeable when driving at all. I mean, you guys can see in the driving footage for yourselves as we get on through the video that there's certainly nothing meaningful there at all. So yeah, when I saw it, I kind of thought, oh no, here we go. But as it's turned out, it hasn't really been an issue at all. So yeah, it does make it a little bit less adaptable and expandable. Just for example here, the cup holder that we put here, we could only use one of the bolts because the second bolt is designed to be in another channel 40 mil away, and obviously that didn't work. So we just had to go with the 1 bolt, but it is what it is. just something to point out to you guys. Now, another thing that contributes to the overall sleek look of the cockpit is the bracketry that they've used throughout. So it's all custom designed stuff pretty much everywhere. They're not using, as we mentioned before, any sort of off-the-shelf bracketry at all throughout the entire cockpit here. So nice thick material everywhere. It is cast aluminium. There are a few areas where you can see casting marks, but certainly nothing that really stands out. But really nice and solid here. Again, no issues with flexes we'll get into in just a minute. And it just has a really nice, clean and purposeful look to it. Another thing I really like is these cap washers that they, or the black ones they actually include. The blue ones are an optional upgrade. You can see these are basically just anodized washers that just dress up the cockpit overall. They've got the Sim-Lab logo etched on there as well. And these are just some M5 ones, which are an optional accessory as well. So if you're mounting additional accessories onto the cockpit, you can dress them up a little bit with those guys if you want to as well. And those are just available on the website. You can see we did dress up the monitor mount a little bit just to kind of blend in with the accents that we have on the XP1 pedals and the seat. But yeah, you can take or leave that kind of thing. I just thought it added a nice little touch to the cockpit overall. But yeah, from the moment that we unboxed those brackets, it just felt really solid, really purposeful, and I guess confidence inspiring, you could say. And you know, as it turned out, it was absolutely the case because there is basically no flex in this thing whatsoever. And look, in terms of the actual build process, I would go as far as to say that this was probably the most enjoyable cockpit that we've put together to date, simply just because it was so simple and everything just kind of made sense. They do include some instructions on their website, which you can take a look at for yourself. So we don't need to spend a whole lot of time here explaining it for you. Basically, it's just in picture format, so you can see where all the pieces go. Very similar to building a piece of IKEA furniture, really. And we didn't come across any instances where there are any errors or anything that didn't make sense really at all. Very simple process. So it took us about 2 days to build this thing up, including mounting the monitor, getting all the hardware mounted and so forth. You definitely could do it faster than that. We were just sort of taking our time, enjoying the process and, you know, adjusting cameras, making sure that we filmed all the bits and pieces that we needed to as well. I'd say if you built an aluminium cockpit before, you could probably knock it over in a day. Allow 2 days though, so it's not a stressful experience, and I think you'll be absolutely fine. So let's move on now, talk about adjustability, starting from the feet and working our way up. So being an aluminium profile cockpit, obviously there's a ton of adjustment here, but I just want to run through some of the key things that I think stand out about this particular rig. So starting with the feet here, you can see really nice solid bracketry here once again. Nice solid post here for the foot as well. So you can basically just loosen the two nuts here. Obviously, if you drop the bottom one, it's going to allow the cockpit to drop down. If you then loosen the top one and then screw up the bottom one, it's going to lift the cockpit up. So very simple to work with there. And it was actually really easy to fine tune the level of the cockpit. And that's going to be something that's really important. Obviously, you want to make sure that the platform is completely level before you start trying to do things like level your wheelbase and your monitor. Because if the platform's out, everything else is going to end up being askew to get the monitor level. And then moving up, we'll skip over the uprights just for now and go to the pedal tray. So pedal tray, again, you can see this solid bracketry here. You've got a piece of 40 by 160 profile here, as well as a piece of 40 by 80, which is in a channel. So that can actually slide forward and back to account for the spacing on various different types of pedals. Now, you can bolt most pedals directly into the profile if you wish to do it that way. Obviously, you would just be using T-nuts, as we saw before, to get that job done. If you have pedals that require you to screw in from the underside or bolt in from the underside, that is, of course, going to be an issue with profile, which is where the pedal tray accessory comes into play. So this is an optional accessory. It does also come with the option of a slider as well, which is a genuine Sparco slider. So if you want to be able to slide your pedals forward and back, that is a good option. It does introduce a little bit of flex and movement, so that's the reason why we're not running it here. I just wanted to keep things as solid as we possibly could. But the pedal tray has cutouts for most of your common pedal types. You're not going to have too many issues mounting pretty much anything on this. And there's also the option of the heel tray as well, which works really nicely. So what I would suggest there, just jump on their website, have a look, think about the types of pedals that you're going to be mounting. You'll find that most will be able to bolt directly to the profile, particularly if they have their own integrated tray or heel rest, but just be mindful of that when you're picking the bits and pieces that you're going to need. In terms of adjustment here, we already talked about forward and back adjustment there. The brackets that this is mounted on have screws in either side, and that's actually quite a range of adjustment there. So you can raise this up quite high, almost to a sort of hybrid formula style seating position, and then obviously you can adjust it in terms of angle as well, so you can tilt it forward or back. Most pedals I find I end up having it tilted slightly forward just to get the angle of the faces right, but again, that's obviously going to depend on the pedals that you're running. Plenty of scope of adjustment there to account for pretty much any sort of pedal set. So let's talk about the wheel deck uprights now. So these are on a 20-degree slant, I guess you could say. So the angle here is 70 degrees rather than the 90 degrees it would be if these were completely upright. Now, the reason this is done is to make getting in and out of the rig a little bit more easy. You can imagine if these are upright, then you've got a little bit less clearance here to get your feet in and out of the rig. Now, look, I'm honestly not a big fan of this subjectively, simply because it does make bolting appendages onto your rig a little bit more, I guess, tricky and cumbersome than it would otherwise be, because essentially the distance that an item that you bolt onto here is away from your seating position is going to be determined by the height as well. So for example, if you're mounting a button box here and you want it to be this high, it's going to sit in this position, but obviously if you slide it down to be lower down, then it's going to move it further away from you as well. And then you have to slide the whole thing back to account for that, which of course then moves your wheelbase, your monitor and everything else back with it as well. So if I had my pick, I would prefer this to be at 90-degree angle rather than 70 degrees, but it does seem to be the way that a lot of manufacturers are doing it now. So maybe they know something that I don't, but it is what it is. Now the wheel deck is a really good example of this because you can see here as you lower the wheel deck, obviously it's going to move further away from you as well. So there is a little bit of front to back adjustment inherent in the bracket design itself, which will account for that to an extent. There is also some angle adjustment available on the base itself by undoing the bottom bolt, and that'll allow you to tilt the base up and down. Now there is a Fanatec version of this side mount available too. That's compatible with all of their current direct drive bases. Now in addition to the side mounts, they do also have this newly designed wheel deck available. So this has got hole patterns for all of your common wheelbases, including the new Acertec bases too. We'll flash up a compatibility chart on the screen for you now. But this is a really cool design. You can see they've added this additional ribbing underneath now that adds a lot more rigidity. You remember previously the wheel decks that they had a little bit more flex in them, noticeably more flex than what we had with the side mounts, whereas now this is just as solid as those side mounts with no meaningful flex whatsoever. So you've got pivot points at the back here, and then you've got a little slot here to mount the front part. So you can imagine as you tilt it up and down in the profile, the bolt is going to slide forward or back in that little channel there, and then you can tighten it down in the position that you want. So nice and versatile, nice and rigid as well, and not too heavy either, being a piece of cast aluminium. Yeah, gets the job done and does it in a nice, simple and elegant fashion. So just to quickly cover off the seat in terms of adjustability, the seat itself, the Speed 1 seat, doesn't have any adjustment built into the seat itself, so it doesn't have any adjustable lumbar support or tilting back or anything like that. The optional seat brackets, of course, do have various different holes that allow you to adjust the angle front to back, and you do have the option of seat rails as well, genuine Sparco rails, if you want to have the ability to slide the seat forward and back. Because these pieces are profile that it sits on top of, run front to back, you can actually adjust the position of the seat relatively simply without a seat slider. It just involves undoing 4 bolts, which can be a little bit awkward to get to underneath, and that will allow you to slide the seat forward and back. But if you are going to be regularly adjusting the seat position, I would recommend going for those sliders, simply because it is going to be a lot more simple. So last thing to cover on the cockpit itself in terms of adjustability is, I guess, what you could call the accessory arm here. So this can be bolted onto either side of the rig, obviously depending on whether you want to drive a right or left-hand drive car. And as we mentioned earlier, this is the optional handbrake mount that we have mounted here. You do have a single channel along the top here that allow you to mount whatever accessories you want. Now, obviously, because it's a channel, you can move things forward and back on that just fine. What you do need to know though is that you do have a little bit of height adjustment here as well. So you can drop the arm up or down on the bracket where it mounts on the bottom of the rig, and that's going to allow you to get this into exactly the position you're going to need it, regardless of what seating position you're using or what kind of handbrake or shifter you might be using as well. So no complaints there whatsoever either. Let's move on now and talk about the integrated monitor mount. So in terms of adjustment on the integrated monitor stand, there's a couple of things that we can do here. So we've got 280 millimeters of adjustment here. You can of course flip these around and face the other way as well if you want to try and drop the monitor between the wheel and the wheelbase. A little bit awkward to do so, but you can get the job done. It's just going to depend on how you've got things laid out on the rig. Again, of course, because we do have that 20-degree angle on the uprights here, as you lower it, it's going to move further away, and you obviously need to account for that by sliding these in. There's a little bit of angle adjustment available here as well. So if you do find the monitor's tilting back slightly or forward slightly, you can adjust here to straighten that out. The bar across the back here is 1.2 meters wide, so it is hidden nicely behind a nice big monitor like what we have here. Obviously, if you're running a smaller monitor, you will see the bar on either side. This, of course, does also come into play if you buy the triple screen add-on for the rig as well. We'll be taking a look at that in a separate video a little bit further on down the track, so stick around for that one. So really, it has all the adjustment that you're going to need in terms of the physical position of the monitor. And then on top of that, we also have the Vario VESA mount as well. So this is a really clever design that allows you to just kind of drop the monitor into the bracket. Then it's got a series of grub screws that allow you to adjust the angle and fine tune the monitor placement. So you can push from side to side, you can angle the monitor in and out. So there's a little grub screw there that allows you to push the bottom of the monitor out if it's tilting too far away from you. And there's also 2 more grub screws here that allow you to push either side of the monitor up as well. And it's really, really simple to use. Literally all we had to do was just put a spirit level on top of the monitor and then just wind in and wind out those grub screws to get the angle exact. So look, it's not intended to allow you to be lazy on the assembly of the rig. What I would still suggest is try to get things as accurate as you possibly can with the rig build, but it's just going to allow you to fine tune or dial in that last % of accuracy to get everything absolutely perfect. It's the first time I've used anything like that, and it made things so much easier. Now, one thing just to be aware of with these Vario VESA mounts is that the monitor isn't physically fixing to the rig. It's dropping into the bracket, as you guys saw. So that does mean that it is possible for the monitor to separate from the rig under, you know, crazy circumstances. So, I mean, obviously if the rig tips over, you're gonna have bigger problems with the monitor separating anyway. But, you know, in a more practical sense, what it does mean is that if you're trying to do something like adjust the height of the monitor, for example, if you loosen these bolts on the side and hold the bottom of the monitor to lower everything down, this is going to drop and the monitor is going to separate, and that could take you by surprise. You could end up damaging something. So just be mindful of that when you're adjusting things. You could work around that by just wrapping a couple of cable ties around there to fix everything in place once it's all adjusted. But obviously it's not really possible for them to have any sort of a bolt that secures it in place because they don't know the relative position of the two halves. So it's just kind of a design limitation. The big question, I guess the elephant in the room there, is also what's going to happen with motion. Now, I haven't tested this rig with motion just yet. Obviously the weight and size of the monitor is ultimately going to stipulate what the experience is like, but we do intend to use this cockpit as our test rig moving forward. So as part of the process, we will be testing this rig out with a number of different motion systems. So we'll make sure we let you know about that if there is anything of significance there. I don't think it's going to be an issue, but if you have a really small lightweight monitor, you may find that it bounces around a little bit. What kind of ends up happening is once you've got everything kind of screwed in, it's kind of wedged in position by all the various different grub screws, but it's certainly not enough to physically hold the weight of the monitor. It's more just kind of keeping it relatively secure in position so it doesn't just sort of slop around and move. And you'll see in just a moment when we get into the driving experience just how stable all this is. So let's talk about the rigidity of the cockpit now as it relates to the driving experience. Now, there's a couple of things that I always look for and pay very close attention to when I'm driving and testing out a cockpit. Just areas that generally, if there's going to be any flex, they'll show up. So the first thing is any bowing in the bottom of the rig here. You can see we've got 2 feet that are, well, 4 feet obviously, 2 on either side, that are quite far apart. If there's any weakness inherent in the profile at the bottom here, when you push really hard on the brake and sort of brace between your foot and the seat of your pants in the seat, any flex there is going to become very obvious very quickly. And you guys have seen in some of our past reviews on much cheaper cockpits than this, that has been a major area of weakness. So happy to report that, I put so much force into the brake that I actually broke one of the elastomers, and that was entirely my fault because I was putting way more force than this particular elastomer was designed to do. So that's not a complaint against Sim-Lab by any means. But yeah, I really got into that pedal, probably putting in 90, 100 kilograms of force, if not more. And yeah, absolutely no bowing or movement in the base at all. Now, obviously that's going to be a really important area of strength because if there is any flex there, then the communication between the seat of your pants and your foot as you're pushing into the brake pedal is going to be compromised. There's going to be variation there, and that can really impact muscle memory. So that's obviously a really important one. That's testing the rigidity of the base as well as the back of the seat. There was no popping or any movement really, or noticeable movement in the back of the seat either. The mounts were all nice and solid as well. And yeah, that was all absolutely fine. No creaking or groaning or anything like that inherent either. But look, honestly, the first thing that I noticed was just how stable the monitor sits in here. You can see some footage here of me rocking as hard as I can from side to side in the rig. And every other integrated monitor stand that I've ever tested, the monitor starts rattling and shaking around. Now you can see a little bit of movement there, but look, it's not even enough that I even see it when I'm driving. So if I sit in there and I'm looking at the road and I'm shaking myself from side to side, don't even notice that wobble at all. It's only when I watch the footage back or if I look at a corner of the monitor, for example, that I can see it. But look, under normal driving conditions, honestly, the monitor is absolutely stable. You guys can see in the footage here for yourselves. You don't need me to explain it to you, but yeah, no perceivable movement in anything really at all. The communication with force feedback is absolutely fine as well. There's no loss of fidelity. There's no damping going on through the uprights at all. Everything's absolutely solid there. If I push in to the uprights, if I push into the wheel unrealistically hard just to try and make it flex, there is a little bit of movement there. If I twist it up and down as well, you can see a tiny little bit of flex. But yeah, you have to be intentionally trying to move things around to make anything on this flex at all. The only area where I did notice a little bit of vibration coming through the rig was just with the shifter. Now we're running the Husingfeld mag shift on the rig at the moment, and that is a really, really solid shift. So what I was finding is that when I did shift, I was just getting a little bit of vibration come through that arm, and then I could actually feel it in my feet on the pedals as well. So that was probably the only area of the rig that had a little tiny bit of movement or any sort of, I guess, communication of vibration through the rig. Everything else is absolutely rock solid, as you would expect for a rig of this caliber. But yeah, look, I mean, no surprises when you see how solid everything is. There's a tiny little bit of dip in the brake pedal when you really get into it. You'll notice in the footage here, the tray just bending ever so slightly. But again, certainly nothing that I think is at the point where it's a point of complaint. We've seen some other pedal trays in the past that bend quite badly when you get into the brake pedal. But yeah, this is absolutely fine. There's no flex in the pedal tray itself. It's not moving or buckling or doing anything crazy like that. And yeah, putting this side by side with my old P1X and, seeing where they've cut costs in terms of material, I thought maybe that this would be an inferior experience to using my old P1X, but look, that's just not been the case at all. It's every bit as rigid as that one was. And yeah, no complaints at all with regards to rigidity. I mean, I could talk all day about the driving experience with this thing, but you guys can see for yourselves in the footage, absolutely no issues whatsoever with regards to any of that stuff. So really, to wrap things up, it's as simple as this. Look, there are a couple of things that I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not a huge fan of the powder coating. I do prefer the old anodized finish. I'm not a huge fan, even though it doesn't seem to impact rigidity, at least in a meaningful way at all. I did prefer having additional channels on these bits of profile, simply because it does make mounting hardware a little bit easier. I did prefer having a 90-degree angle here for the uprights, so having these be completely perpendicular rather than having the uprights on that 20-degree slant or having the 70-degree angle here. It just makes mounting things a little bit more cumbersome because you have to account for things moving away from you or closer to you as you raise or lower them. But look, I mean, you are able to get everything in the position that you want it ultimately. And look, I think most people aren't really using rigs like I am. They're not bolting things on and taking them off again constantly. It's more of a kind of set and forget kind of affair. So a little bit more cumbersome to get things mounted initially, but once everything's in position, it's all fine. Using nice high quality T-nuts as well. No issues at all with the T-nuts sliding around inside the channels. The paint doesn't seem to impact that at all. But we did have a couple of paint defects with some of the pieces of profile that we received. They did, as I said before, tell us that that isn't the normal experience. They have sent us out some replacement profile, which is on its way to us. But again, if you do own one of these, they did tell us that they've sold literally thousands of these things so far. So if there are any issues, let us know in the comments down below. I think that's going to be the best way for people that might be looking at buying one of these to get an accurate picture of what the real world usage experience and customer journey is going to be like. But yeah, look, instructions, simple to follow, absolutely no issues building the thing. Most enjoyable cockpit I think we've ever put together. And that's not just because we're more experienced at it now. It was genuinely a joy to assemble. No confusion, no parts that don't need to be there. I think to summarize the experience overall, this screams experience. This screams something that's been designed by people that have a lot of experience in the industry, really know what they're doing, have a clear understanding of what it is that sim racers actually want. And yeah, I think that other than those subjective things that I preferred about my original P1X, I think they've absolutely nailed it. And I think if you buy one of these things, you're going to be absolutely over the moon with it. Not only does it look absolutely fantastic, and as I said in the start of the video, I think this is probably the first aluminium profile cockpit that I've tested that I don't think would look out of place in a modern day living room. But on top of that, it has all the functionality, all the rigidity, all the expandability, and everything that you could possibly want out of an aluminium profile cockpit. So yeah, it's a big thumbs up for me, guys. Let us know again down in the comments below if you own one of these, what your experience has been like. If there's anything that you found that you think people need to know about, this is a great opportunity to let the community know. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps things up, guys. If you do want to pick up one of these or any other sim racing gear, check out the discount codes and affiliate links in the description box below. It's a great way to save yourself a little bit of money and help us out in the process. So we really appreciate your support there. But above all, guys, thank you very much for watching. Leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe as well so you don't miss out on that Samsung 57-inch monitor review that I know a lot of you are keen to see. Really excited to put that one together for you as well. But thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.